Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of Anonymous. Normally, I have the guests of the show tell these stories, but in this episode, I will be narrating these two very scary experiences, and the identity of who provided them will still remain anonymous. If you have any stories you would like to be featured or want to be interviewed on the show, reach out to me at the Alec Miller on Instagram. If there is anything I learned from these two stories you're about to hear, is that nightmares do come true. And remember to lock your doors. Enjoy the show. A man breaks into the apartment. This story happened to my mother when she was in her mid-20s, sometime around 1979 or so, just a few years before she married my dad. She was living with a friend in an apartment on a shady street in her roommate was a musician, and she was out of town for the weekend and not expected to be back until the next day on Monday. On Sunday night, my mom went to bed and she heard some rattling in the front room. She then heard the front door open. She thought that her roommate was back. However, as seconds went by, she wondered why her roommate didn't turn on the light. Then, as she heard things being moved around in the front room, she realized that she was in desperate trouble. There was one room between her and where a burglar was. There was a back door behind my mom near the kitchen, but it was always kept locked and she didn't have a key. Being a religious person, she began to pray. Her mind became clear and she thought the best thing to do would be to remain still and quiet. Maybe after he got the money out of the purse, he would leave. Still praying, my mom snuggled down into the pillow, but was so frightened that she was shaking all over. She opened one eye to see the figure of a tall, dark man coming through the doorway. He was quite tall. She knew that he had to be over 6'4" because her fiance, my dad, was that height, and this guy was taller than that. As he walked toward her in the room, she still thought she would try to remain quiet and pretend to be asleep. He stood at the foot of her bed and looked down at her, tilting his head from side to side as if trying to see her face. She decided that these were most likely her last few minutes on earth. She cried out to God and said, "Father, Father, Father," and screamed as loud as she could. When she stopped screaming, she realized that the huge man had walked back out the front room and out the front door, closing the door behind him. My mom locked the door, turned on the lights, and realized that it was not a dream. Later, she called the police and she made a report of the incident. It turns out the guy who broke in got less than $10 from her purse. They asked her to identify him through small pictures, which only showed faces. Not having seen his face very clearly, she could not identify him, as they all seemed very much alike. She finally chose one of them. The detective had been a teaching assistant at the University of where my mom took classes, so she knew him. He looked rather disappointed at the picture she chose and said, "I wish you chose this man right here," pointing to another man. He is 6 feet 6 inches tall and was just paroled last week. He lives 2 streets down. Nothing more came of the incident from the police report. The next week, my mom read of a similar incident several blocks away. However, the woman did not survive. My mom stayed with another friend for several weeks, even though her roommate was back. She didn't feel safe there for the time being. Some friends were critical of how she handled the incident, some saying, "I don't think they would have screamed," and other stuff like that. One friend said, "Don't you see what happened? When you called out, 'Father, Father,' he thought there was someone else in the house with you, causing him to leave in a hurry." That's the story of how our Heavenly Father protected my mom that night over 40 years ago. Scary sleepover story. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together. And were often found together both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together throughout elementary school, and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house, since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and grandma at the hospital. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I get along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother/cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 or so, There was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of the night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were there in the city and they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home. When Cole said that they were unavailable at the moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they can come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their room, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff. But since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though we were all guys there and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning I got up because I had to pee, and so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was at the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and the particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back in the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them up and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving toward us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house. And after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they probably realized that there were no adults there and figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure that there was no one else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed. So, just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer. If you guys made it this far into the video, I hope you enjoyed it. Most likely you did if you made it this far. Continue to send me stories to my Instagram if you want me to narrate them, or DM me if you want to be a part of the show and be interviewed like you see in some of my other videos. Every story you share does not have to be spooky like these, but in the spirit of Halloween, keep these coming if you have any. At the end of the day, these stories just need to be entertaining and your identity anonymous. That's it. Until next time, you guys take care.